6,608 guns, 3.5 million shells, 5 hours to break an army. At 4:40 on the morning of March 21st, 1918, the largest bombardment in human history shattered the silence over the Somme Valley. British soldiers in their trenches heard nothing at first. Fog, thick as wool, swallowed everything. Then came the thunder. Then came the gas. Then came the gray figures emerging from the mist like ghosts, appearing at the trench lip before anyone could fire a shot. Germany was making its last gamble. Russia had collapsed. American troops were flooding into France at 10,000 per day. The window was closing, weeks, perhaps months, before the weight of the New World crushed the old empires of Europe. Everything the Kaiser had fought for, everything a generation had died for, came down to this: one massive blow to break the British army before the Americans arrived in force. What followed would be Germany's greatest victory of the war. It would also be the wound from which they never recovered. By the winter of 1917, Germany stood at a crossroads that would determine the fate of empires. 3 years of industrialized slaughter had bled Europe white, but now the strategic calculus had shifted dramatically. The Bolshevik Revolution had knocked Russia out of the war. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk freed dozens of battle-hardened divisions from the Eastern Front, and German railways worked around the clock to shuttle them westward. For the first time since 1914, Germany held numerical superiority on the Western Front. 192 divisions against 178 Allied. It was a fleeting advantage, and everyone in the German high command knew it. Across the Atlantic, the industrial colossus of America was awakening. Though the United States had declared war in 1917, its army barely existed. But American factories were roaring to life. American shipyards launching transports, and American recruits drilling by the hundreds of thousands. By summer, that trickle would become a flood. 1 million fresh soldiers with no memory of the Somme or Verdun, no war weariness in their bones. Erich Ludendorff, the de facto supreme commander of the German military, understood the mathematics of doom. Every week that passed shifted the balance against Berlin. Germany could not win a war of attrition against the combined resources of Britain, France, and America. There would be no negotiated peace while the Allies smelled victory. The only path to survival was a decisive blow. Now, before summer, before the Americans arrived in force. They called it Kaiserschlacht, the Emperor's Battle. But 3 years of trench warfare had proven one terrible truth: the Western Front could not be broken. Every offensive, German or Allied, had drowned in mud and machine gun fire. The Somme, Verdun, Passchendaele, names written in blood, measuring gains in yards and losses in hundreds of thousands. The solution would come from an unlikely source: small groups of specially trained soldiers who would fight not as a human wave, but as a flood, finding cracks, pouring through, drowning the enemy from within. They called them Stormtroopers, stormtroopers. The doctrine that would nearly win Germany the war began in the mud of 1915, with a captain named Willy Rohr and a handful of volunteers willing to try something different. Traditional infantry tactics treated men like ammunition. Expendable rounds fired in waves at enemy trenches. Rohr's idea was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of attacking everywhere and hoping something worked, find the weak points and exploit them. Instead of massive formations that made easy targets, use small teams that could adapt and improvise. Instead of waiting for orders from distant headquarters, trust the men on the ground to make decisions. General Oskar von Hutier refined these concepts into a comprehensive system, first proven at Riga in 1917. The Hutier tactics, what historians would later call infiltration doctrine, turned conventional military thinking inside out. Where traditional assault sought to destroy the enemy line, stormtrooper tactics sought to make it irrelevant. Small groups of elite soldiers would probe the enemy defenses, searching for gaps like water-seeking cracks in a dam. When they found weakness, they poured through, not stopping to fight, not waiting for reinforcements, but pushing deep into the enemy's rear. Their targets weren't the frontline trenches but the soft organs behind them. Headquarters, artillery batteries, supply depots, communication lines. The strong points they bypassed would be left for follow-up troops to reduce. The Stormtroopers had one job: keep moving forward. The men selected for these units were Germany's finest. Young, almost all under 25, physically elite, unmarried, because the high command knew the casualty rates would be catastrophic. They trained with live ammunition, learned close combat with knives and sharpened entrenching tools, and practiced the art of the grenade until they could clear a dugout in seconds. Ernst Junger, who would survive the war to write Storm of Steel, called them the hardest sons of the war, men who had found a kind of terrible purpose in the storm of battle. They were volunteers, aggressive by temperament, and they knew exactly what they were signing up for. But creating elite units came at a cost the German high command failed to appreciate. The best soldiers, the bravest, the most capable, the natural leaders were stripped from regular divisions to fill stormtrooper battalions. What remained were the trench divisions. Older men, reluctant conscripts, soldiers whose spirit had been ground down by years of horror. Germany was creating a two-speed army with a razor-sharp tip and a hollow core. The stormtroopers would fight with weapons no infantry had ever carried. The MP-18 Maschinenpistole was the world's first true submachine gun, a compact automatic weapon that could empty its 32-round drum magazine in seconds. In the cramped confines of a trench, where a rifle was too long to swing around a corner, the MP-18 was devastating. Soldiers called it the trench broom. For fortified positions that bullets couldn't reach, the Flammenwerfer provided terror made manifest. A two-man team could project a stream of liquid fire 18 meters into a bunker, and many defenders chose surrender over that death. Stormtroopers also carried their own light mortars, pocket artillery that freed them from dependence on the ponderous batteries behind them. But the Stormtroopers' signature weapon was the steel hand granite, the stick grenade. They carried them everywhere. 2 canvas bags across the chest, grenades bristling like deadly fruit. The stick provided leverage for longer throws, and a trained stormtrooper could clear a trench bay in the time it took a rifleman to work his bolt. Looking at a stormtrooper in March 1918 was like glimpsing a soldier from another era. Gone were the parade ground uniforms and gleaming equipment of 1914. In their place, knee pads and elbow guards for crawling through mud. Gas masks worn on the chest for instant access, not stowed in a case. Soft caps instead of the distinctive Stahlhelm when stealth mattered more than protection. These men were specialists in violence, and every piece of their equipment reflected that terrible expertise. But revolutionary infantry tactics were only half the equation. The other half would fall from the sky. Colonel Georg Bruchmüller was not an impressive man to look at, but the soldiers who survived his artillery preparations called him Durch Bruchmüller, Breakthrough Müller. The problem with conventional artillery doctrine was simple. It didn't work. For 3 years, both sides had tried to pound enemy trenches into submission with barrages lasting days, sometimes weeks. The results were always the same. Yes, trenches were destroyed, but so was any possibility of surprise. The enemy knew exactly where the attack was coming and rushed reserves to meet it. And the bombardment churned the battlefield into a moonscape of craters and mud, where attacking infantry bogged down and artillery couldn't follow. Bruchmüller's solution was counterintuitive. Less time, more violence. Instead of a week-long bombardment, his hurricane barrage, reshaped, would concentrate the same firepower into just 5 hours. The goal wasn't destruction, it was neutralization. Don't try to kill every defender, blind them, deafen them, cut their communications, fill their lungs with gas, make them unable to fight in the critical hours when the infantry arrived. The scale of preparation defied imagination. Over 6,600 artillery pieces and 3,500 mortars positioned along a 50-mile front. Ammunition stockpiled for months, hidden under camouflage. Every gun pre-registered on its targets using mathematics and maps, not ranging shots that would alert the enemy. When the moment came, there would be no warning. The gas warfare component was particularly diabolical. Bruchmüller's chemical sequence was designed to defeat the one thing that protected soldiers from poison: their gas masks. First came the Blue Cross shells, diphenylchloroarsine, a compound that penetrated mask filters and attacked the respiratory system. It didn't kill directly. Instead, it caused violent sneezing, vomiting, and a burning sensation in the eyes and throat so severe that many soldiers tore off their masks in desperate search for relief. Then came the Green Cross, phosgene, a lung agent that killed slowly and horribly as fluid filled the airways. Those who had removed their masks in agony from the Blue Cross inhaled death with their next breath. It was chemical warfare refined to industrial precision. The masks were not protection, they were a trap. Facing this storm was the British Fifth Army under General Hubert Gough. His 12 infantry divisions held 42 miles of front, a desperately thin line stretched over ground recently taken over from the French. The defenses were incomplete. Shallow trenches, thin wire, few concrete shelters. Gough had complained repeatedly about his vulnerability, but his warnings had been ignored. Field Marshal Douglas Haig, commanding all British forces in France, had made a calculation that would nearly prove fatal. He expected the German blow to fall in Flanders, far to the north, where an attack could threaten the Channel ports that were Britain's lifeline. He kept his reserves there, leaving Gough dangerously exposed. Haig believed the devastated Somme battlefield would slow any advance. He was wrong. On the night of March 20th, as German assault troops crept into their forward positions, fog began rising from the valleys. By midnight, it was so thick that men couldn't see past arm's length. British sentries peered into white blindness, hearing nothing, seeing nothing. At 4:40 a.m. on March 21st, 1918, 6,000 guns split the darkness, and the fog became Germany's secret weapon. The bombardment hit the British lines like a physical blow. Men who survived described the sound not as noise, but as pressure, a weight that crushed thought itself. In the fog-shrouded trenches, there was no warning, no buildup, just instant chaos as high explosive and gas shells rained down on positions that had seemed quiet moments before. Within minutes, the British communication network ceased to exist. Telephone lines were cut, runners couldn't navigate through the explosions, and the fog made visual signals useless. Battalion commanders lost contact with their companies. Companies lost contact with platoons. Platoons became isolated knots of men, choking on gas, half deaf from concussion, fighting blind. The gas was worse than anyone had experienced. Blue Cross shells penetrated the filters of British masks, turning protection into torture. Men ripped off their masks to vomit, to breathe, to escape the burning in their eyes. And the phosgene was waiting. Artillery crews died at their guns before they could fire a shot. Machine gun teams slumped over weapons they never got to aim. At 9:40 a.m., the German infantry went forward. The fog that blinded British defenders became the Stormtroopers' cloak of invisibility. They crossed no man's land without taking fire, cut through wire without being seen, and materialized at trench lips like gray ghosts before anyone could react. One British soldier later wrote that the enemy seemed to come from everywhere at once, figures looming suddenly out of the mist, MP-18s chattering, grenades detonating in dugout entrances. The Stormtroopers followed their training with terrible precision. They didn't stop to fight, didn't get bogged down in trench-clearing battles. They found the gaps and poured through, leaving strong points for the follow-up divisions. By mid-morning, German assault teams were miles behind the original British line, overrunning artillery positions, capturing headquarters, spreading panic through the rear areas. The Fifth Army began to disintegrate. But not everywhere. At a position called Manchester Hill, near St. Quentin, Lieutenant Colonel Wilfrith Elstob and the 16th Manchester Regiment refused to break. Surrounded and cut off, with no hope of relief, Elstob was asked by telephone if he could hold. His response became immortal. Here we fight, and here we die. They did both. Elstob was last seen throwing grenades at the oncoming Germans, wounded multiple times, still fighting. He was killed in the final assault. Of the hundreds who held Manchester Hill, 42 were taken prisoner. The rest died where they stood. Elstab received a posthumous Victoria Cross. His heroism was real and extraordinary, and completely irrelevant to the tactical situation. The flood had found its gaps, and no single dam could stop it. By nightfall, the numbers told a story of catastrophe. 38,500 British casualties, the second worst single day in British military history, exceeded only by the first day of the Somme. But unlike the Somme, where the line had held despite the slaughter, the front had been ripped open. 21,000 men were prisoners. Nearly 100 square miles of territory had changed hands. German assault troops had advanced further in a day than any offensive had achieved in 3 years. The Stormtroopers had done the impossible. They had broken the Western Front. What no one yet understood, not the exhausted German soldiers catching their breath in captured British trenches, not the panicking Allied commanders trying to understand what had happened, not Ludendorff marking gains on his map with satisfaction, was that the very magnitude of this victory contained the seeds of defeat. Germany had won its greatest battle, and in winning it, they had begun to lose the war. The problem announced itself within hours of the breakthrough. The German army was advancing faster than it could eat. Stormtrooper units pushed 40 miles into British territory in the first days, an almost unimaginable distance by Western Front standards. But behind them, the logistical system was collapsing. The old Somme battlefield, which Haig had believed would slow the German advance, did exactly that to German supply wagons. There were no roads. The landscape was a cratered moonscape of shell holes, collapsed trenches, and rusting wire. German trucks, already scarce due to the British naval blockade, rode on iron-rimmed wheels because there was no rubber for tires. Those iron wheels tore apart whatever remained of the road surfaces. Horse-drawn artillery, still the backbone of fire support, bogged down in mud up to their axles. Fodder for the animals was exhausted within days. The Stormtroopers had achieved the breakthrough. Now they were on their own. Meanwhile, the Allies fell back on a weapon the Germans couldn't match: railways. The French and British rail networks, intact behind the front lines, allowed Foch to shuttle reserves laterally at speeds no marching army could match. German soldiers walked toward Amiens. Allied reinforcements rode trains. The further the Germans advanced, the more the equation favored the defenders. Then came the warehouses. When German soldiers fought their way into the town of Albert and the captured British supply depots, they found something that broke them more effectively than any artillery barrage. For years, German propaganda had proclaimed that the U-boat campaign was strangling Britain. The enemy was starving, the newspapers claimed. One more push and they would collapse. German soldiers, subsisting on K-bread, stretched with sawdust and turnip soup that was mostly water, believed it because they wanted to. What they found in Albert was mountains of tinned beef, white bread, chocolate, coffee, cigarettes in quantities that seemed obscene, and wine cellars vast and overflowing. The psychological impact was devastating. "We have been lied to," was the unspoken thought spreading through the German ranks. The enemy they were supposed to be starving lived better than they did. The sacrifices of the home front, the hunger of their families, the deprivations they had endured, all of it was revealed as pointless suffering while the British feasted. Discipline collapsed. Rudolf Binding, a German staff officer, recorded the scene in his diary. Soldiers in women's clothes, wearing top hats, staggering through streets awash with wine. I could not get my men out of the cellars without bloodshed. The pursuit stopped while the army gorged itself. At German headquarters, Ludendorff was making the problem worse. Having achieved a breakthrough, he seemed unable to decide what to do with it. His original plan had called for destroying the British army and driving them back to the Channel ports. But the success in front of Amiens, the critical railway junction linking the British and French armies, tempted him to shift forces south. Then reports of opportunity elsewhere pulled resources in other directions. Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, commanding the Northern Army Group, complained bitterly in his war diary that the High Command was living hand to mouth, with no clear operational objective. Instead of concentrating all available force against one decisive point, Ludendorff was spreading his attacks across the front, ensuring that no single thrust had the power to achieve a strategic breakthrough. The Schwerpunkt, the point of main effort, the fundamental principle of German military thought, had been abandoned in the moment of greatest opportunity. Meanwhile, the men who had made the breakthrough possible were dying. The mathematics of attrition now worked against Germany with cruel efficiency. The Stormtroopers had been created by stripping the best soldiers from regular divisions. Every assault wave was led by the most experienced, the most capable, the most aggressive men the German army possessed, and every assault wave took casualties from that irreplaceable elite. In the attack divisions, there was no rotation. The same men who had broken through on March 21st were still at the front a week later, then 2 weeks, pushing forward on dwindling rations and no sleep, fighting without the artillery support that couldn't keep pace. The human body has limits, even when driven by iron will and amphetamines. The casualty reports told the story. Stormtrooper battalions that had gone into the offensive at full strength were reduced to company size within days. Platoon leaders were killed and replaced by corporals, then by privates. The skills that had taken months to train, the instincts for infiltration, the ability to lead small unit actions, the precision with grenades and close combat, died with the men who possessed them. Replacements were available, Germany still had men, but they were not the same. Older soldiers, half-trained conscripts, men whose spirit had been broken by years in the trenches filled the gaps. The attack divisions that had been Germany's razor edge were becoming as dull as the trench divisions they had once scorned. By the time Ludendorff recognized the danger, it was too late. Germany was bleeding out its best soldiers in the pursuit of a victory that kept receding. On March 26th, as the German advance threatened to split the British and French armies entirely, Allied leaders gathered in desperate conference at Doullens. The crisis had finally achieved what years of war could not: unified command. Field Marshal Haig, whose confidence had collapsed along with his front line, agreed to subordinate himself to a French general. Ferdinand Foch was appointed Supreme Allied Commander, the first single authority over all Allied forces on the Western Front. His first words set the tone. "I will fight in front of Amiens. I will fight in Amiens. I will fight behind Amiens." French reserves began moving to plug the gap between the armies. The Allied line bent, but did not break. On April 11th, with German pressure continuing, but the breakthrough still not achieved, Field Marshal Haig issued an order that would become one of the most famous documents of the war. Every position must be held to the last man. There must be no retirement. With our backs to the wall and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. Backs to the wall. The phrase captured the desperate reality. The Allies were closer to defeat than at any point since 1914, but they were still standing, and the German army, the instrument of their potential destruction, was destroying itself. Ludendorff demanded one more push. Amiens, the railway junction that could sever the alliance, lay just 12 miles away. The exhausted, starving, depleted German divisions prepared for a final effort. 12 miles. It might as well have been 1,000. The last act played out on a ridge overlooking Amiens at a town called Villers. In early April 1918, German forces made their final push toward the railway junction that could end the war. The high ground at Villers commanded the approaches to the city. Whoever held it controlled the fate of Amiens. Exhausted German divisions, shadows of the force that had broken through 2 weeks earlier, prepared to take it. On April 4th, they succeeded. German troops captured the town, and for a moment, victory seemed within reach. From the ridge, German artillery observers could range on Amiens itself. The railway junction was under threat. One more push, one more day, might be enough. That night, the Australians came. 2 Australian brigades, supported by British units, launched a counterattack with no artillery preparation. There was no time for bombardment. They attacked in darkness, navigating by compass, hitting the German positions before dawn. What followed was some of the most savage fighting of the war. The Australians had a reputation for ferocity that even the Stormtroopers respected, and they earned it that night in the ruins of Villers. close combat in shattered buildings and shell craters, bayonets and rifle butts and grenades, men fighting by feel in the darkness. By dawn, the town was back in Allied hands. The German assault had been broken. Ludendorff called off Operation Michael. The offensive that was supposed to end the war had achieved remarkable tactical results. 40 miles of territory gained, nearly 250,000 Allied casualties inflicted, the British Army shaken to its foundations. By any previous measure of the Western Front, it was an enormous success. But success was not victory. Amiens remained in Allied hands. The British and French armies remained connected. The railway junction that could have severed the alliance still functioned. Germany had punched a massive hole in the enemy line, and the hole led nowhere. The cost of this non-victory was catastrophic. 240,000 German casualties concentrated disproportionately in the elite units that had made the breakthrough possible. The Stormtroopers, the men who had broken the trench deadlock, who had achieved what 3 years of warfare could not, were gone. Dead in the mud of the Somme, victims of their own success. What remained of the German army was a hollow force, depleted divisions filled with second-rate replacements, an officer corps thinned by casualties, morale crumbling as the truth about Allied abundance spread through the ranks. Germany had traded its future for 40 miles of shell-torn wasteland. The men who could have held the line in autumn had been sacrificed in spring, and autumn was coming. Operation Michael was only the first blow. Through April, May, June, and into July, Ludendorff launched 4 more major offensives: Georgette, Blücher-York, Gneisenau, Marigny, each following the same pattern as the first. Initial success as German tactics overwhelmed the defenders, rapid gains of territory, then exhaustion as supply lines stretched beyond breaking and the irreplaceable elite were fed into the grinder. Each offensive ended the same way, with Germans holding worthless salients and burying men they couldn't replace. By July 1918, the German army's offensive capacity was spent. On August 8th, the Allies struck back at Amiens, the prize Germany had failed to take. The attack broke through German lines with contemptuous ease. Ludendorff called it the Black Day of the German Army. It was the beginning of the 100 Days Offensive that would end the war. Ludendorff suffered a nervous collapse, demanding an immediate armistice one moment, insisting the war could still be won the next. He was forced to resign in October, by which point Germany's defeat was inevitable. General Gough, whose Fifth Army had borne the brunt of the March 21st attack, was dismissed as a scapegoat. His reputation never fully recovered, though historians have since recognized that no commander could have held that line with those resources. Ernst Junger, the stormtrooper officer who chronicled his experiences in Storm of Steel, survived the war despite being wounded 14 times. He received the Pour le Mérite, Imperial Germany's highest military honor. He lived until 1998, a witness to both world wars and the Cold War that followed. And the stormtroopers themselves, those who survived the spring offensives, found themselves in an army that no longer resembled the force they had joined. The elite that had broken the Western Front was dead. What remained would surrender in November, broken and bitter, convinced they had been stabbed in the back by politicians at home, rather than beaten by enemies in the field. It was a lie, but it was a comforting lie. And lies, as Germany would learn, have consequences. Germany came closest to victory in March 1918, and in that moment of triumph, ensured its defeat. The stormtroopers proved that the trench deadlock could be broken. Their infiltration tactics, Bruchmüller's artillery methods, the combination of speed, surprise, and initiative at the lowest levels, these innovations shattered the conventional wisdom that had produced 3 years of bloody stalemate. They achieved what million-man armies and year-long bombardments could not. But they also proved that tactical brilliance cannot overcome strategic reality. Germany could break through anywhere on the Western Front. They could not exploit the breakthrough fast enough, supply the advance far enough, or sustain the effort long enough. They won every battle and lost the war. The lessons did not die with the Kaiser's empire. Young German officers studied the spring offensives obsessively. They understood what had worked: the speed, the shock, the combined arms coordination, the initiative trusted to junior leaders. They understood what had failed: the logistics, the inability to exploit success before the enemy recovered. The solution, they realized, was mechanization. Add tanks to the Stormtrooper breakthrough, and you could exploit gaps before they closed. Add trucks to the supply columns, and you could keep up with the advance. Add aircraft to the combined arms team, and you could paralyze enemy reserves before they reached the battlefield. The mud-caked MP-18 soldiers of 1918 became the spiritual fathers of the panzer divisions that conquered France in 6 weeks. The Hutier tactics, refined and motorized, became blitzkrieg. The revolution that had failed in the trenches would return, transformed, to reshape the world. And so the Stormtroopers' legacy is written across the 20th century. They died proving that the future of warfare had arrived. They just couldn't live to see it. They were the best soldiers Germany ever produced, and Germany spent them like ammunition in a gamble that could never have succeeded. Their victories consumed them. Their success destroyed their army. Their finest hour was also their last. They called them Stormtroopers. And they were right. They were a storm. Devastating, unstoppable, and ultimately impossible to sustain. They broke the Western Front, and in doing so, they broke themselves. The tactics born in the trenches of 1918 would return, transformed, in 1940, when panzer divisions using Stormtrooper doctrine conquered France in 6 weeks. If you want to understand how that happened, consider exploring more of this channel's content on the evolution of modern warfare. Thank you for watching.